BBC Broadcasting has. Now, we're joined by the former Conservative Energy Minister, Greg Barker, who's now in the Lords and chairs the London Sustainable Development Commission, and by UKIP's Deputy Leader, Paul Nuttall. Welcome to you both.
Andrew.
Are you confident that Paris will be more of a success than Copenhagen?
I think that's without a doubt. I mean, Copenhagen was not in any terms a success. And I think very few people could have expected, even a year or two ago, that we would be in a position to make real progress at Paris. The reason for that is the cost of clean energy has come tumbling down in the last 5 years. There's been big advances in technology, and the large economies are actually finding that they can reduce carbon emissions while still growing. So the whole transition to a low-carbon economy back in 2010, 2009 was, you know, a pipe dream almost. It was a hypothesis. Now it's really happening, and in an affordable way. So we need an ambitious deal in Paris. There's still a long way to go, but I think things are looking more encouraging than they did even 12 months ago.
But on current projections, carbon emissions will be 22% higher in 2030 than they were in 2010.
Yeah, globally they're going to carry on going up. But the big news is China, the world's largest emitter, has committed to peak their emissions by 2030. That's something that was almost unthinkable back in 2009 in Copenhagen. What you have is the big developing economies who are going to dominate the economy of the 21st century actually accepting that they are part of the solution too. And you don't have this sort of finger pointing that you had at Copenhagen where it was all left to Europe or all left to the US. Everybody now has got a sort of common responsibility. Different roles, but a common responsibility. And there's one more thing I would say, Andrew.
Briefly,
is that,
I need to bring
sure. The UK plays a disproportionately important role in these talks. I think we've got the world's best climate negotiators who get very little credit, but actually the UK is seen as a global leader on this agenda, and people are working with us at a technical level.
Let me come back to that. What do you want to happen in Paris, if anything?
I would like to see a level playing field for us, the British, because at the moment what tends to happen with these at these climate change conferences is that Europe bounds on ahead and attempts to meet the targets when the growing economies in the East, China and India, for example, basically take absolutely no notice whatsoever. And I'll give you an example. At this one, we're talking about the Chinese saying that their carbon emissions will peak at 2030, but demographers are saying that China's population will peak at 2030. And of course, emissions are generally driven by population. So, you know, their commitment doesn't really add up to much.
What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's a very mean-minded way of looking at it. I think anyone who really looks thoughtfully at this realises that China's commitment, India's engagement on, particularly around clean energy and solar, what the Americans are doing,
India's building a lot of coal-fired power
stations. But the Indian emissions are...
How is that a commitment to clean energy if it's building coal-fired power stations?
Indians emit about 1/10 per capita of the emissions of the US. And of course, some of these large economies are going to grow their per capita emissions. And it's right, they should do so. We're not talking about holding people down in poverty. There's got to be economic growth. We've just got to find ways to do that in a clean way and work to them. This also represents a huge opportunity for British businesses because we've got some of the best brains and technology and firms who are going to make a lot of money out of this low-carbon transition.
Nearly all the technology for wind power has been imported.
Well,
it's Siemens is building in Hull, not the British.
Wind power is one example, but if you look across the board at the value of the low-carbon economy sector into the UK,
the Chinese lead
was the fastest growing.
The Chinese lead in solar panels. The Europeans, Danes, Germans, they lead in wind power. Where do we lead?
We lead on a whole range of subgroups within that. I mean, you're absolutely right. We're not a big, heavy manufacturer in that way. But in terms of light materials, in terms of energy efficiency technology, in terms of a number of tech applications, and also in finance, more money was raised out of London to finance the global low-carbon economy than any other centre.
I thought your government had just closed the Green Bank.
No, absolutely not.
Sidelined the Green Bank.
The Green Investment Bank. The Green Investment Bank is a huge success story. It's now being privatised as a result.
What's its capitalisation?
It's about £6 billion now.
That's it.
Yeah, £6 billion, which of taxpayers' money, and now as a result of privatisation, they're going. No, that's because it's only taxpayers' money, but it's going to attract private investment and leverage that private investment 3 to 1. So you're talking billions of pounds.
Is it not time for Britain to recognise that if it is to cut carbon emissions, its economy has to change? There's been all these steel job losses in the north, probably more to come. But is that an inevitable changing of the balance of power in the world economy, that it's not, we're an advanced economy, that's not what we do anymore?
Well, I think the problem is energy prices. I mean, the energy prices in Britain are 3 times that of France. They're the most expensive in the EU and indeed the world. And the problem is, it's what the people who...
Most expensive hold on. Our energy prices are the most
UKIP, that's a bit bizarre.
Energy prices
in the world?
No, sorry. Energy prices in Britain are the most expensive in the European Union. 3 times the price of that in France. The problem that we've got is that... hang on, but the problem that we've got, Andrew, is that companies are moving from Britain to the cheaper economies where it's cheaper in India and China and whatnot, and we're being left behind.
Of course, when they move, when steel production is moved, CO2 is not cut.
Absolutely
right. It
right.
simply moves to
Very
areas
important.
where the CO2 emissions are less monitored, shall we say, than they are in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely right. That's why you've got to be sensible about this and ensure that you don't disproportionately penalise industry. And we probably need to do more to ensure that they maintain their competitive advantage. But clean electricity, wind power, solar power is actually driving down the cost of wholesale electricity in the UK now, because costs have come down so much. That's the really exciting thing.
But that hasn't been reflected in wholesale prices. That hasn't been reflected in the retail prices that either domestic users or industrial users.
He was talking about industrial prices.
Well, it's not 3 times. The cost per kilowatt is 9 pence in Britain for a heavy industrial user. It's about 4.5 pence in France. It's half. Why is it so much in Britain?
Because we disproportionately load energy taxes and levies onto industry rather than consumers.
Well,
For example,
you did that.
No, historically it's always been the case that we've put less on consumers and more on industry. In Germany, it's the other way round. Consumers pay a lot more for their money, for their electricity, than we do here in the UK. But ultimately, you're looking at it the wrong way. What we need to look at is making it cheaper by using less. And energy efficiency has a lot more potential in this country, and we can drive down people's bills by helping them use less in the home.
But I'm led to believe that green levies are actually putting around £70 on the energy bills of households in this country.
That's correct. Out of the total bill of about 1,300.
We've been subsidising these wind farms, which in effect make rich people richer and poor people poorer. I mean, it's not sustainable and it's not fair.
Let me bring Stuart Wood in here. What's your view?
Well, I mean, I agree with Greg that there's cause for optimism. I was at Copenhagen with Gordon Brown's team, and it was a mess.
Was it as much of a shambles as people talk about?
It was a mess. It was a mess because there wasn't this bottom-up process that David Shukman talked about. Big countries arrived and sort of told other countries what to do at the end. The US and China had different pressures not to do a deal. Developing countries were very resentful, as you say.
Didn't the president have to leave early because there was a massive snowstorm coming in?
It was very cold and very snowy. I remember that. I don't know if he had to leave early or not. But,
not the ideal background for a global warming conference.
Indeed. But I think the process this time around has been much, much better. I mean, one thing I would say, I don't want to make a cheap point, but I'll make a small cheap point. Which
carry on.
Which is, thank you, thanks for the permission. Which is that, I mean, I think both Gordon Brown and David Cameron, in a rare moment of sort of teamwork, inadvertent as it may have been supportive of this agenda of providing funds for developing countries to buy them into a global deal. But on the domestic front, I mean, Amber Rudd didn't even mention Paris in her conference speech. The Secretary for Climate Change didn't even mention this huge
and there's been a huge cut in subsidies to the renewable energy.
10 green NGOs wrote a joint letter
this week, and she was very punchy on Paris.
Why are you cutting subsidies?
Because the cost of the technology is getting cheaper. We don't want to live with subsidies a day longer than we need to, and it's a huge success that they can come down so quickly.
Why have you withdrawn support from zero-carbon homes, which have been in the pipeline for 10 years, bought in the construction
industry? Because we want homes built rather than perfect homes, staying on the drawing board.
But every single aspect on renewables investment, zero-carbon, fuel tax seems to be going against the renewables and clean energy agenda rather than supportive of it. How can you have moral leadership
under David Cameron's premiership, we've had unprecedented investment in clean energy. The UK has become a world leader in offshore wind. We have a massive pipeline.
Which is the most expensive form of energy.
But the cost is coming down.
Well,
across
we
the bo-
keep on
acro-
being told... So,
across the board, the cost of clean energy is coming down
so if it's coming
dramatically.
down, why do all these companies scream that if you take our subsidies away, we won't do it?
Because there's a balance to be struck. But I cut the tariffs for solar in 2011, and they did this. And we then had a massive expansion. The question is getting the right balance. But
All right.
across the board,
we've not got the right
we're
time,
squeezing
I'm
out
afraid.
subsidy.
We're squeezes of time, but we've got a month in the run-up to Paris. There'll be lots more of this. I thank you both.